Well, hello everyone and welcome to the Women Automotive Network September Leadership Interview. This month we are diving into menopause in the workplace and what business can and should be doing to best support their employees. So introducing myself, my name is Holly Goodberry and I am from the Women Automotive Network. And before we start, I would like to thank those who have joined today for being here and also invite the audience to get involved, to use the chat function, ask any questions you may have on this subject. We aim to make this a conversation that's open and honest, where we can all share our best practices and experiences. So please do get involved and use the box to answer any questions that you may have. So today we are joined by Jane Cusdin and Sharon MacArthur, both who have a passion for promoting inclusive workspaces and creating positive business-focused conversation around the subject of the menopause. Jane and Sharon, I would like to pass this over to you now. We would love to learn more about you, your background, why this subject is so important to you, your personal experiences on the menopause, and why it is a conversation for all.
Hello there, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm really happy to be here. So I'm Jane Cusdin, and for the last 24 years, I worked in the automotive industry, and I can say with confidence it's been quite a ride. I started my career at Navtech, which was a global automotive tech company, back in 2000, and in 2018 joined Jaguar Land Rover here in lovely Warwickshire. Over the course of my career, I've navigated a full spectrum of experiences and challenges, from development and promotions to maternity leave and being a working parent. And I've also faced various health situations, including perimenopause. I must admit that the automotive sector hasn't always been an easy space to navigate, and there have been some significant pain points for me along the way. And I guess with reflection and that experience, I can understand why. This industry has a real long heritage, and many of the policies, the systems, and the cultures were established or merged before women became a really significant part of the workforce. And these fundamentals of business just don't often fit the needs for today. So I began to realise this, and I looked around me and I saw women also working their own way through these challenges. And I started to question, why are there so many female role models, so few female role models ahead of me? And it built something in me, that need to actually do something to make a change, something to make it better, to make it easier, to make the workplace more modern. So I became an active member of Jaguar Land Rover Gender Equality Network, and I set out on a mission to advocate for the changes that were needed to make it a more inclusive and a more welcoming environment for diverse women. So over 5 years, I focused on allyship, on women's development, women's health. And the goal I had in my mind was to see more women in leadership positions, working in gender balanced teams, and ensure that the business understood the rewards of this diversity through better business offerings for female customers. So from the car design, from the car engineering, to the manufacturing, to the marketing, and to the sales. But with all the other pain points of my career, it was my experience, my own experience of perimenopause, that really ignited my voice and my campaigning on these particular efforts on this topic. Initially, when I realised I was going through perimenopause, I felt shame and I felt confusion. I felt so lonely. And I felt that the best way to change these feelings and turn it into something positive was to take some action and to do something and bring people with me on the journey. So I wanted to bring women together. I wanted to normalise the topic. I want to remove the taboo. I want to bring everyone, all genders, into a space where we could talk about this, and also bring it into a space where we could talk about any other wellbeing topic as well, with empathy, understanding, and with action. And also, I really wanted to pave the way for women behind me. So back in 2021, I began a steady, constant program of work, moving the conversations forward, creating that inclusive and supportive culture. And the impact has been significant in JLR. And I'm proud of any of the movement that I've made, any contribution to that movement. And the release of the menopause policy earlier this year was testament to much of that work that was done. But I know that with lots of business change, it takes time, it takes resources, and it takes that desire to bring change too. That's my story.
Thank you, Jane. That's lovely. Sharon, over to you. Oh, Sharon, I think you are muted.
Have I gone? Am I there? Am I there? Am I back?
You're back.
Right. Well, yeah. I was just saying,
Okay.
how can I follow that? But yeah. Hi everybody, and I'm delighted to be here too. My name is Sharon MacArthur, and my company name is Miss Menopause. So if you told me several years ago I was going to get passionately involved in the menopause, I would have said, "Don't be ridiculous. That's got nothing to do with me in my life." My background is I used to be a senior leader in a FTSE 100 company here in the UK. And I was there for over 14 years. And I used to think I was really smart, that I was really streetwise, and that I knew a lot of things about a lot of things. And when I was about 47, 48, I'm currently 56, one of my very good friends, dared to say to me, "Sharon, do you not think you're menopausal?" And let me tell you, I was outraged. I was like, "How dare you think I am menopausal?" Because in my mind's eye, I really believe that whatever that menopause thing was, it wasn't going to happen to me. And I don't have any children. It was my body, my choice. So I truly believe, because I hadn't shaken up my hormones through pregnancy, that whatever menopause was, it really, really wasn't going to happen to me. And all I can tell you about part of my story is I often tell the story that menopause could have killed me, because in my perimenopause, although I didn't have words for it at that time, it really wasn't commonly called perimenopause. I was so tired. I could only sleep for maximum about 2 hours a night. And I fell asleep at the wheel of my car when I was driving at speed. So I was saying menopause could have killed me. And at that time, like a lot of women I've met still, I was just getting on with it. I was just getting on with it. I was helping to run the household. I was going to work full time. Till eventually I thought, "Sharon, I think you need to do something about it." And there were a couple of catalysts over the years that set me off on this journey. I spent the day with 60 GPs. And that was rather terrifying. I don't have the time to tell you about that, but if anyone wants to get in touch with me, I'll tell you afterwards. And then I did like a mental health first aid course about 9 years ago. And what I found really surprising was when I asked the question, "When are we going to learn about menopause in this mental health first aid course?" the answer came back as, "Oh, we don't do that." Now I keep track on those courses. And last week, guess what? It's still not in there. It's still not in there. So I set up Miss Menopause in 2018, January 2018, really with the mission to make menopause business as usual. That's all I want to do. And I have a strange business ambition where I hope one day I'll be made redundant, because that will be an absolute testimony to the fact that menopause has become business as usual. And I'm delighted to be here when we're talking about, women in automotive, because I've been doing an awful lot of work in the last 6 to 12 months in very male-dominated spaces, a lot in manufacturing, so a lot in automotive. We really need to change the dialogue if we're going to make menopause business as usual. And it's really important that we get men to come along in this conversation, because what I say about women of the world is we're insidious, we're everywhere, there's no escape. So we really, really need to get everybody bought into this subject, because if we don't, we're going to continue to lose good people and fail to attract great people at the same time. So there you go.
That's amazing. Thank you, Sharon. Thank you both for sharing, why you're here, why you're doing what you're doing. And I think it's really important to understand where you've come from to where you are now as a woman in the automotive sector who is also perimenopausal. I understand where you are, but also, knowing that there are people out there that are championing us, that are role models, that are supporting us, I think is really, really important for anybody watching this now to know that there is support, there is the opportunity to get some advice, and there are things changing out there. Because when I first started going through the menopause, there was nothing. So to have something now, I think is really important. But like you said, there's still a lot of work to do. So Jane, over to you. Why do businesses themselves need to open up the conversation around menopause? Why do they need to have action? Why do they need to have training? And what should they and could they be doing for their employees?
I really think it's important to start with the data. So if we look widely, menopausal women are the fastest growing workforce demographic in the UK. And these numbers are continuing to rise. And employers are starting to recognise that menopause is having a major impact on their workforce. So 1 in 10 women aged 45 to 55 actually leave the workforce due to inadequate support. And there's been surveys and data that's been collected, one in particular from Newson Health of 3,800 women. 59% had taken off due to their symptoms, taken time off due to their symptoms. 18% were off more than 8 weeks. 50% of these women resigned or took early retirement due to their perimenopausal or menopause symptoms. So I think looking at the data and then taking it into a business, I was keen how that translated into JLR, and listening into the women, putting out a survey to actually understand, is this happening as well in our business? And the results came back that there are struggles with managing symptoms, getting the support from managers, and it is impacting the experience at the work and the career progression. These are women that are in the prime of their career, stepping back, leaving, not progressing through those leadership positions. So there's real evidence that there's a correlation between unmanaged menopause symptoms in the workplace and women's ability to thrive. And that has a huge financial impact on companies and also to the UK economy as a whole. But I think, it's not a women's issue. It really isn't. And talking about it is really key if we're ever going to remove that, the historic stigma that's attached to it, that taboo, and change the narrative on that. And it's amazing what's happening in society now, that there are trailblazers, Davina McCall, Caroline Harris, Dr. Louise Newson. There are many that are changing the thinking around and removing some of those taboos in society. And that's great because it's estimated 13 million women. That's 1 in 3 women are either currently going through or having reached menopause. And that's something that it touches everybody, because everyone knows a woman in midlife, they're a partner, a family member, a friend, a colleague. And talking about and tackling these topics really opens up conversations for well-being for all genders. And I think that is really super important.
Definitely. I mean, yes. When you look at business point of view and the number of women that are in the workforce that will go through the menopause, it's a huge business issue. And, if they've got people that are having to take time off, or like you say, having to end their careers early because they just can't, I mean, that's crazy, isn't it? So any kind of support that businesses can give and things that they can do to support their current workforce, and retain that talent that they already have rather than lose it, seems to make complete and sensible business sense, doesn't it? So Sharon, from your point of view, what are the first steps that an organisation can take to start this process, to start looking at their employees and how can they support them? Where do they start? You have an organisation that really wants to support them, but that path can look quite daunting, I imagine. It's a big subject and it can be a slight taboo subject as well. So where do they start?
Well, I agree with Jane. You really need to start with the data, but more importantly, you need to have what's the purpose of what it is you're going to do, and you have to be really clear. And especially if you're looking for buy-in, especially from senior people, you have to talk their language. So, as Jane quite rightly said, it's about profitability, and can you afford not to consider this subject, as opposed to thinking, well, the other way around. It's really, really important. But it's thinking really about having a strategic plan. And I think what's really interesting with lots of companies, you might think, oh, well, we've got a strategic plan and it might last, 3 years, 5 years, and that's excellent. But one of the most important things is, if you're going to invest in any kind of strategic people plan, it's to make sure you have a maintenance plan. So how many of us have worked in an organization where maybe 2024, we're all going, right, it's menopause, and everyone's really excited and we're doing lots of work around menopause. And then by 2025, something new and exciting has come along and menopause is kind of put on the shelf a bit. And then a couple of years later, somebody new comes into the business and they say, let's do menopause. And everyone has a bit of an eye roll and says, oh my goodness, not that again. Because what you didn't do, you didn't think about whether you were going to plant something like menopause as part of your DNA. So I truly believe that as an organization, you may wish to think about what are the things that it doesn't matter who's in charge, who the CEO is, who the senior leadership team is, but we commit to having a core of things that happen around here, whoever's in charge. And maybe menopause might be one of them, because every single person in your business, directly or indirectly, will be touched by that event. So having that maintenance plan. So an example would be, if you had a head count, and I'm just being very low level, but of 1,000 people, I've been working with lots of suppliers. So 1,000 humans, you might think, well, that plan might take 3 years to embed it appropriately. And that might mean that you might educate people. You might run, say, for example, 4 education sessions a year. I'm just making these numbers up. But by year 3, rather than thinking, oh my goodness, right, you've done it, tick the box. Where is the business now? Are you in growth? Are you flat or are you in decline? So for example, if you're in growth, you've been in acquisition mode, you might have acquired another 1,000 heads in those 3 years. So straight away, you would have to replete the plan straight away, because otherwise, 100% of your business will not have a clue what you are talking about. If the company's flat, then what's your attrition? So it might be, I'm making this up, 10%. So 10%. So if you do nothing for 2 years, 20% of your organization will know nothing about menopause if you stand still and run as a set of events. And I think that's one of the key things to really think about. How do you, whatever journey you're starting off on, how do you make it business as usual as opposed to a set of events? And I think another key thing is getting some of that senior sponsorship involved at the very, very outset. And especially, perhaps male colleagues who really are influential and who can start to tell their own stories about menopause. Now, one of the things I say in any business is the gold dust that sits in everyone's business are the stories each and every one of us hold about ourselves. So some of the most powerful things I've ever seen in businesses, large and small, is where a senior influencer stands up and shows their vulnerability by telling an element of their story. And if you can get people to do that, it really creates that psychological safety and enables other people to start telling their own stories. And I think that, when he said, what's the starting point? I think they're two of the key main things to start with.
I think you're completely right there. And it's so interesting to hear how you explain that, because a lot of people would think a starting point, okay, yes, we need a plan, but, we need to do this, this, and this, and not have that forward thinking that you just said about, think forward to how big is your business going to grow? What is it going to look like? How many women do we plan to have, hopefully, within this organization? There's lots of things to think about there. So you may have a certain workforce right now, but actually your workforce and your business needs and where you are and what countries you're operating could easily change within a couple of years and easily within 5 years. So I think having that really forward thinking about it is so important. And you're quite right there. And engaging everyone in the conversation. Men do need to be involved. Leaders need to be involved. We know that if people at the top don't get involved, it doesn't happen. It needs to trickle down as well as trickle up as well, doesn't it? So I think that's really good to point out where businesses can start from and how they can start to think about it if they really want to make some change there. So Jane, this isn't just about ticking boxes, this is meaningful actions that we want businesses to do. So what small adjustments can businesses start to make to better support their female and their male workforce with the conversation of menopause?
For me, I think conversation is really key, and it's equipping the people managers with the information and the education that they can use as that foundation to build on with their own curiosity and their own research. So it's a real desire for managers and people who are involved with other people to be proactive, and then when there are conversations that happen, for managers to understand that they don't actually need to be an expert. They don't need to be an expert to help someone and show that they care. They also don't need to fix the issue, but they do need to have that awareness, and they do need to create a culture in their team so that supportive conversations can happen. And then guidelines, policy, other resources in the business that are useful in providing best practices for how to have that wellbeing conversation and give practical examples of adjustments. But most women will know what adjustments they do actually need to manage their symptoms. But it's in the gift of the manager to be able to do those straight away without the need of occupational health or HR. So, an example would be, psychological symptoms, if they're memory loss or memory problems or difficulty concentrating, then it could be as simple as having some protected time agreed, in the diary without interruptions. It'll help bring that focus back. Or if there's day sweats or hot flushes, facilitating ordering of a fan or additional uniform, ensuring access to cold water in facilities. These really are within the gifts of the manager if they take the time to understand what is needed, and to actually have a broad thinking, because menopause can affect us all, everybody. So for a partner too, it could be that there's additional stress in the household, that we could be talking to a peer or a colleague, or to a male who has got a partner who's having difficulty sleeping at night, so there's impact on them as well. So there's a real open openness to thinking about what kind of conversations you could have and creating that environment and that understanding and awareness. So it's really important to, for managers to have that, come at it from that angle, but also, continue the care. It's not a one-stop conversation because, symptoms change and needs change. So that continuation of care is really important. And also, I would say that people don't need to be a line manager to be an active ally. An ally for menopause. There's so many things that people can actually do. Getting comfortable with the terminology, period, menopause, saying them out loud in the workplace. Why not? Let's get comfortable with these things. Make the effort everybody can make the effort to understand the basics. There's events often run in businesses and by networks. Do your own research. Ask women around you if there's to tell their story. Initiate a conversation. Also, know that menopause can happen in so many different ways as well. It isn't just women of a certain age. This is, there's so many other ways that, menopause can come to women, surgical or premature menopause. These are things that we can become aware of. And we know that, diagnosis from doctors can be hard. Access to HRT can also be really hard. There's lots of things we can do. Just as standard in organising meetings, don't organise them in small and ventilated rooms. Make sure that there's breaks during drive events. These are just really thoughtful things that we can do for everybody. So I think that being an active ally in the workplace, leave those menopause jokes back in the 70s and call them out if you hear them as well, because it's not okay to talk about menopause in that way either. So I think that there are many things that we can do to support those conversations.
It's the gift that keeps on giving. What can I say?
Oh, dear. Bless. I mean, it can be a really tough time for a woman, can't it? I understand from going through menopause extremely early in my early 30s that, it's not a fun experience and there wasn't much support, or who do you talk to? All I had to talk to were older women in my workplace that I don't think I felt comfortable talking to about with them, because it felt to me like a thing that I shouldn't be going through. So by listening to these open conversations with everybody, men and women, leaders, managers, anybody within an organization, I think is really key. And what you've just said there, businesses can support all of their employees, however they may be impacted it, as a woman, as a manager, as a fellow colleague, just making sure that your colleague is okay. And I think the key thing really was there that speaking openly, periods, menopause, all of that, they're not dirty words. They are just words. They're like medical terms or whatever you want to use. They are normal words that we can talk about, and we should be talking about them every day. 10 years ago, if you were asking for a tampon for somebody, you would be, oh, excuse me, have you got one? Whereas now you would openly in the office say, right, can anyone help me out today? And that's where the conversation is shifting, and it definitely needs to continue shifting in that direction without a doubt. Being open and having everyone involved seems to be really, really important in this. So following on from that, Sharon, what can employees do to best support the change? So this isn't just for businesses to react to. Individuals are a part of the process as well. What is it as an individual within an organisation we can also do as a male or female employee?
Well, I think being open to education, being open to learning what menopause is about. And I think, when you talk about menopause, women could spend now up to a third of their lives in menopause. And I think a lot of people don't appreciate, once you're menopausal, you are menopausal for the rest of your life. And a lot of people, especially in manufacturing, they love a process, don't they? And the thing is with menopause, it does not follow any process route. So symptoms can come and go, and you may have them for the rest of your life. You may never have any symptoms of menopause. And I think the thing is, it's being aware that you are menopausal for the rest of your life. So an example would be my mum at 75 last year hadn't had symptoms of menopause for 20 plus years. Last year, she started to get hot flushes again for the very first time in 20 years. So I know exactly. So a gift I'd like to give everybody is this, and it's a really important gift, and you can use it yourself, or you could give this gift to a colleague, a friend, a family member, whoever that might be. And here is the gift. Is the menopause negatively impacting the quality of my life or of your life? And if anybody answers yes to that question, doing nothing shouldn't be an option. And I think that's the thing that still makes me most incredibly sad in all the years I've been doing this work, that when I ask most women, so statistically, 8 out of 10 women will tell me that they've had some kind of symptoms. A further 1 in 4 will say, it's been horrific, Sharon, it's been terrible. I always follow that up with, what are you doing about that? Guess what the majority still say? Absolutely nothing. So when you talk about what can you do, well, I think more importantly, it's a bit like the advert says, did you know it's because you're worth it? And I really want, everybody, and especially women who are menopausal, to think really more deeply and care even more than they do now about themselves. I would say as a species, womankind, we're pretty rubbish at caring for ourselves. We're caring for the kids, we're caring for families, we're running households, we're, working full time. And when I say to women, what are you doing? They're kind of saying, well, I'll get to that at some point. So when you talk about a business, absolutely, there's an element of duty of care from every business out there. And if you're a line manager, there is indeed an element of duty of care. But I would say, should the biggest duty of care not perhaps sit with me, the individual? Because even if you're giving me the most or offering me the most incredible reasonable adjustments in the workplace, as the gift that keeps on giving, menopause is going to be with me 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So what I'm saying, unless I join in, unless it becomes what I call an equal active partnership, where both individuals in that relationship join in together, it's never going to work. It's never going to work. So I think it's really, really important that we take our own personal accountability for our own health and well-being and our own bodies, because surely the person who needs to know their body best of all is who? Well, it's you. So what I'm saying is, in the 7+ years I've been doing this work, the brilliant news is I've never met a woman yet who said, Sharon, I've tried everything and none of it's worked. But what I would say is it's going to take many, many women out there months, even years of, I've called menopausal women live living experiments. And that's quite simply because what works for one might not work for somebody else. So it becomes a complete and trial and utter experience of what you're trying to do, and what works for you may never work for me. But the brilliant news is I know that you can manage menopause, and menopause is to be managed, not endured. You do not get a prize for doing nothing. And that's really, really important. So doing nothing shouldn't be the option.
No, you're quite right. If we're ill, if we're poorly, we go to a doctor, we get some help, and it's no different. But also, you're quite right. Everybody's experience of the menopause will be very, very different. So what they need and what support they might need from their employer is going to be very varied, right? So what support they might need from their employer, from their manager, from their colleagues, that will vary from individual to individual. And as women, we are historically bad at asking for help, putting ourselves out there and making those steps and doing what we should be doing, whereas men find it a lot easier to do that. And that is something that's systemic in our society. So with the menopause, it's the same again. And I think we've, for a number of years, been made to feel like we can't talk about it openly, certainly not in the workplace when there's men around. But, we feel like, I don't know, like a shame about it, which we shouldn't. It is normal. It is natural. You wouldn't feel shame if you were pregnant, would you? You'd be openly blossoming and blooming and talking about it and excited about it. We may not be as excited about the menopause, but we should still be talking about it and talking to our colleagues, talking to our friends, and making sure we're looking after ourselves properly. And that is so, so key, because otherwise, if you haven't done everything to try and support yourself, then how can you go to your employer and say, well, you haven't done enough? We need to look after ourselves too at the same time, don't we? So moving on from that one, like, Jane, how is it that women should be expecting from their employer? Like, what is it they should be expecting from their leaders, from their managers? And then if they're not getting the right support and they have genuinely asked and put themselves out there, what can they do from that point of view?
Well, I think it's really important. It's really key what Sharon was just talking about, really. I mean, we don't often, put ourselves forward. And there are women also that don't want to talk about it in the workplace. And I've come across with my conversations, there's so many different angles. Some women don't want it to be talked about at all in the workplace because it makes women look weak. I've been approached by men that don't want to hear about it because we're in a workplace and we're here to work, not talk about these things. So there's a lot of, there are barriers to progress as well, and there's sometimes different things, different challenges to for women to overcome, to be able to ask for that help. Once they realize that they do need the help and they're helping themselves, and then they need additional help, actually coming forward and asking. And there were new challenges around wanting to talk with maybe younger leaders. So younger leaders, managers now that perhaps haven't got that lived experience, and there's like that embarrassment and that stigma is still there. So asking for that support, while the cultural and the business change is still slow, it's still slow, and that awareness that we're trying to establish and keep going so that business as usual is really embedded in. It's hard because there's lots of different different blocks and barriers for women to ask for help. Another challenge in that is, especially in automotive, there's a lot of women and men that don't have access to technology and shared systems. So making that awareness and that, understanding that you can ask for help is even harder. So these are things that, I do think that, it will take a lot of time to sort of unpick, and so that women can get to the support that they do need. But I think there's real value in having like dedicated resources to access. Lots of signposting of lots of businesses, lots of automotive businesses have many resources that people can access, and knowing those and knowing where to get them and having the signpost of them easily found is really key. And those employee-led networks that is a big part of my world in JLR. They're there to keep the message constant and consistent, and to build that community. So people can go to those for support. In the early days, when I said that I felt lonely and I felt lost, and the first thing was to sort of build my education and my understanding. And there were so many women around me going, I didn't know this was a thing either. Oh God, right, really? What is this? And so, we have to kind of sort of embark on a journey at many different stages, women that know, women that don't know, and women that, have moved forward and need that support. So, sharing stories, men, women sharing their stories is very, very powerful, because that is a way that you can show that you're not alone, but everybody's journey is different, and it's a way of doing it in an empathetic and a human way, to keep telling and sharing those stories.
I mean, this is amazing for everyone watching now to hear this, to feel empowered and to know that there are options out there for you. There are people that they can talk to. And as a woman, whether we need support or not, what it is we should be expecting and how we can maybe go about getting that. And like you say, everybody's different. Not everybody wants to talk about it in the same way, but there is still, for everyone out there, whatever they're going through, there is some support or someone or something that can help them. So again, I'm going to go out to the audience because we haven't had any questions yet. Like, if anyone has any questions for Sharon or Jane on any of this, please do pop them in the comment box. We will be checking and I will ask them for you. It'd be great to have some audience participation here. So a quick one for both of you here. What has been the toughest challenge in all of your experience, and how have you overcome that? So Sharon, I'll go to you first. What's been your toughest experience?
Well, I think when you talk about the subject of menopause, I'm going to use this phrase, which I really don't like at all, but I'm going to use it because I hear it still a lot: women of a certain age. So it's really getting people to understand that every single person on the planet will be impacted directly or indirectly through menopause. So I suppose it's engaging men in the conversation, and also engaging even younger women in the conversation who, I don't know if you did this, I remember being a younger person and looking at older women who were maybe a bit grouchy and thinking, oh, why is she being like that, and being really quite nasty or thinking nasty things about that person. Now I feel mortified and I think, oh my goodness, she was probably going through menopause and I just didn't get it. So I think it's really important that we have engaging education that allows people to want to come along and learn about this, not in a dry, boring way or in a facts and figures kind of way. And I often find when I'm working in automotive or I'm working in very male-dominated businesses, I think they look at, especially a female facilitator, and they probably think she's a man hater. She's going to pick on me and she's going to make me look ridiculous. So I guess it's really toning down and making, I call it the room that the room of trust is what I call it when people come into the room. And there's no such thing as a daft question, which means you can ask whatever you want. There'll be no judgment here. And if you can learn as much from me as I can from you, as we can from each other. And I get people working in groups, and so they're learning from each other. So you might sit with a colleague who starts telling you a story about themselves, about their wife, partner, or girlfriend. And that might encourage you to open up a little bit about your story. And now you're just talking. But I'll tell you an interesting story when I talk about, trying to engage young people. So it was a younger woman came to one of my sessions not too long ago, and she was very quiet throughout most of the session, because we know, don't we, that statistically women are having children later in life. We know that's a fact. And we also know that young people, especially in the UK, are finding it really hard to leave home because it's too expensive. So this young woman said, when I was leaving, for home from work this morning, my mother threw a butter dish at my head. And I was like, well, that's not a common symptom of menopause that I've come across. But I kind of take your point. And in her own words, she said, Sharon, I love my mother, but she's shouting at me, she's screaming at me. She went, I don't want to spend any time with her at all. So what she was able to do, having come to a session around menopause, was go home and have an open, honest adult conversation with her mother. And what's really interesting about menopause is often we will spot signs in others long before they spot signs in themselves. So she was able to go home and talk about what she'd learned that day and encourage their mother to go down what I call a medical route. So her mother ended up on hormone replacement therapy, HRT. So not only because a younger woman had come into a session around menopause, was she more prepared for her own menopause as and when the time comes, you had an employee who was much more engaged because her home life had been transformed, all because she came to a session around menopause. So really, I want you to think about how menopause has tentacles that reach into the corners of every single person's life. And that this information can't harm anybody in your workplace, but it actually could help everybody in your workplace at some point in their own lifetime, whether that's them directly or indirectly. And it's really, really important that we expand our mind and be much more sophisticated in our thinking to appreciate this isn't just a woman's issue. It actually belongs to everybody. Because think about also when you're talking about engaging men in the conversation, what about those male colleagues who are going home to wives, partners, and girlfriends who are no longer sleeping? What health and safety risk is that if you have drivers, machine operators in your business? What health and safety risk are they? And then you might have male colleagues who are telling you they're anxious, they're worried, they're concerned. And the reason is their relationships are falling apart at home. And so just before Christmas, I met a guy, and I'm going to say it's a bit of a sad story, to be honest, because he came over to me and said, Sharon, can I shake your hand? I said, well, COVID's not quite over, but go on, I'll let you. He said, when he got talking, he said, I had light bulbs going off in my head. He said, but I feel really quite sad about it, that I feel like I really should have met you 3 years ago. Because he said, I think it's the reason my 27-year-old marriage has ended, because I didn't know anything about it, and neither did my wife. So this information can save relationships. It can actually save lives. And I guess that's why I remain so completely passionate about the subject, because this is a subject for everybody.
Honestly, your passion comes through, both of you, and why you're doing it, and the experiences you had personally, but also the people you've met along the way, and the experience, and then they've had, and they've divulged to you, and you've seen it firsthand. You've seen people struggle. You've seen that they've needed support and assistance. So being able to be in your position and be that person to offer it must be a really lovely feeling. We've actually had a question come through from the audience, so I'm going to ask you that, because Anne Sheldon has asked, what advice would you give to those trying to get their business to establish policies to support women going through menopause, but are struggling to get traction and support? So I think we touched on it slightly before, but I mean, are there any key things or key places that people can go to if they're really struggling with their business to get them to get on board with this, basically?
Well, I can sort of. Oh, sorry. I was going to say I can just sort of link that to my answer there on the biggest, the toughest challenge, because the it's about that systemic change, right? So it's about creating the business case and taking it back to, the reasons why the business needs to think about this, and looking at the data and bringing that to be very relevant for the business that you're in. And you can look at the macro environment and what's going on, but to bring that back into the business and to translate that, if you can get senior leader buy-in, then that would be the game changer. That's what happened, very much at JLR. It was creating that business case and then taking it to the board and getting the support in that sponsorship right at the highest level was the game changer. It was a very slow process up till then, but to make it really relevant, to really make it human and understandable, and and say we can't afford not to do this. There are so many well-being reasons, there are so many business reasons why we should be tackling this and making it a business as usual element to work. So I do think that that going back to that, getting the sponsorship, getting the understanding from those senior leaders is a real key way to start. Sharon, did you have any other thoughts?
I'm going to be a bit controversial when you talk about policies, because how many people in your business are saying, I can't wait for you to write another policy, said nobody ever, because they just don't have the time to read them. So I'm all about simplicity, really, and I'll ask you to consider, rather than write a brand new policy, because I think that the root of this is education. That's what people are lacking. They don't know what they don't know, so they make things up. So what if you educated everybody, or everybody who really needed to know at an absolute minimum? How could you begin to see the world through a menopause lens once you've understood the subject? And I've actually made up a word. How could you menopausalize your current processes? So how could you stitch menopause into the ones you've currently got? Because the thing is with the menopause policy, especially if you call it a policy, it can sometimes trip you up. Because sometimes line managers read it in a very black and white way, and if it's not on there, they don't offer it, etc., etc. So an example would be if you have a uniform, area of your business, which in automotive there's an awful lot of uniforms. So it might not be your uniform review might not come around for a couple of years, but in the next uniform review that you do, you might now consider the design of those uniforms, which might have been originally cut around the design for male bodies. But you might now start to begin to consider the choices of fabrics, because you've understood what menopause is more about. So let me tell you, it was an interesting conversation, and it was actually for a company in automotive. What they found was the women had brilliant kit, and when it was cold, they had fleeces and hoodies, but they were pull over your head hoodies and fleeces. So the women, because you actually alluded to it, Janie said, ask your people. The women were kind of saying, well, this doesn't really work for us on, when we're doing on the lines, whatever they were doing. So what somebody had said, could we not have a zip? How transformational is that? But how super simple. So they were able to ask for some hoodies with a zip that they could undo when it was safe to do so from a health and safety point of view. And it was brilliant. The women were so happy because they had hoodies with a zip rather than just pulling over their heads. So simplicity is the real key here. How are you going to get buy-in and how are you going to get engagement? So rather than think about creating more work, more policies, how can you stitch it into the ones you currently have? So return to work would be another idea. So I'm sure lots of you have return to work policies and processes. So if somebody's absent, if they're late, what have you. So imagine if you were to stitch menopause into those policies, it gives your managers and leaders the root cause or the reason behind that absence, lateness. And so it starts to join things together rather than push them apart. So if we can help people to see what's the same, not what's different, you get so if they're talking about mental health and well-being, menopause, the number one symptom, as often cited to me, is anxiety. So if we can stitch them together, you stand much more chance of getting that buy-in from senior leaders who are hopefully thinking, well, it's less work than I thought. And also, therefore, watering down into your people thinking, oh, right, I don't have to be worried because I'm doing that already. So that's what I'd like to say about it. Don't create more work for yourself if you don't have to.
I think that's really important to look at as well. Yes, policies are important and we do need them. They have a place and they have a reason. But also, if you've got 100 different policies, who is going to read all of those? Who is going to necessarily understand all of those? And I think both of you have said it very clearly. Communication is key, and getting the buy-in from everybody. So yes, a policy or stitching it into another policy, I think is very important. I think businesses need to have that because they're holding themselves accountable by having that there. But at the same time, then where you can't just do that, tick a box and you're done. It's about the training that you give to your employees, the training that managers has, enabling managers to be able to be confident to make those reasonable adjustments for their employees, whatever it is, whether it's relating around menopause or whether it's relating around something else. We need to empower our workforce to be able to support the employees as best as possible. And by empowering them, it's a trickle down effect. Everyone feels more confident, they're happier in their workplace. And as we all know, retaining talent right now is a really key thing, especially in the automotive industry where things are changing. People are going off, to brighter and better things within the tech industry and all sorts of things like that. Things keep changing and people keep moving around, and you want to keep, if you have talent, you want to keep it. And so by doing all of this, I think it's so important. I'm really conscious that we're kind of running out of time now, and I know we had a few more questions left, and there's another question from the audience, so we'll make sure that we answer that question directly to that person that's asked it. So thank you for that question. And I know that we had a couple more things that we wanted. So very quickly from both of you, what are your top 3 tips you would recommend to any organization to start in this journey?
Shall I go? I would say plan it, keep it simple, and have clear accountabilities. So it's not just a management group that have to do all the work, or your people, that people know they're in it together. So there you go. Short and sweet from me.
That's perfect. Jane?
For me, I would say that going back to that senior sponsor in the business, someone who's a great role model, keeps the conversation alive, keeps people accountable, set some goals and design what success and change looks like in the organisation, how it could be measured, and how that links back into the scorecard and those business objectives, business outcomes. And then make the topic interesting, make it about the other people, they need to take action. That's the key thing. Some people don't underestimate what people will not do because they don't know what to do. So giving simple actions and ideas is really very powerful to making steps towards that change.
I think they are great tips and great advice and things that we as employees and then businesses can really take on and start to make actionable. And it's good to know that there are companies out there doing it. And it's good to know that there is support for employees and companies who want to start this process. It's clear from our conversation, it's key to have everyone from every level involved in this conversation. All of us can be affected, and we all need to have an understanding, and we need to be able to adjust how we talk about it and what that conversation is like, depending on the person, depending on the environment. But still, everybody needs to be involved. Understanding, especially as a leader, to be able to provide compassion to your team, make reasonable adjustments and be empowered to create a supportive and welcoming place for their employees. Like I said before, staff retention is high on companies' agendas right now, and maintaining a happy workforce is now more than ever so important. So creating a space to have these conversations by businesses, I think, from what you have both said, conversation is the word that keeps coming up. We need to have that conversation. So I'm very conscious that we have gone slightly over time, but it leads me to say thank you to both Sharon and Jane for joining us today and giving us a really positive and clear insight into the menopause in the workplace. And thank you to everyone who's joined us today. I hope you got a lot from this discussion. Jane and Sharon have kindly provided us with some resources that we will share after this live interview via our LinkedIn page. So please do keep an eye out for that, and we will post that on there. And if you would like to know more, you'll find it here. As well as this, please go and connect with Sharon and Jane on LinkedIn. Get in touch if you or your business has a need for support in this area. And lastly, what is next for the Women Automotive Network? Well, excitingly, in 4 weeks' time, on the 8th of October, we will host our European Summit in Stuttgart. Here we'll be joined by Linda Jackson, CEO of Peugeot, Barbara Frenkel, board member of Porsche AG, and many more inspiring speakers giving us a real insight into their journey, how they got to where they are, and some really interesting and women-focused pieces from the automotive industry. There are still seats available for anyone to join. We have also released our 2025 schedule with summits in Detroit and Mexico. So please head over to our website to learn more about all of this, and also book your seat for next month if you're interested at womenautomotive.com. Thank you again, Sharon and Jane, and thank you everybody for joining us. I really enjoyed this. I hope you have too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And goodbye, everybody.